Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you those in the room for bearing with me while I worked out how to put on a microphone, which seems to be harder than it needs to be. So today we're going to be talking about bird ringing. A couple of disclaimers right at the very start. I rung my first bird, or ringed I should say, my first bird a year ago, 2 days ago. So I'm very new to bird ringing. And whilst a year of experience seems like quite a long time, my ringing trainer and some of the other trainers I've met have been ringing for as long as I've been alive. Sorry, Peter, for saying that. Peter is my trainer, and I'm hoping that he'll tune in as well. So if I mention Peter, that's my ringing trainer. That's who I'm referring to. So yeah, whilst it is going to seem like I've got lots of experience, actually in the grand scheme of things, bird ringing is this enormous ornithological project. And it takes years and years and years to get experience. So for example, I've extracted about 30 birds. For me to get a license to be able to ring on my own, I need about 500. So it's a good while until then. So there's quite a lot that I'll be able to talk about. There's quite a lot that I've learnt, but by no means am I an expert. And if you've got questions I can't answer, I'll take them away, find the answers and come back to you. So the talk's not necessarily to encourage everybody to go out and sign up as bird ringers. Whilst that would be fantastic, it's quite a difficult task, and as much as it's lovely, and you'll hear me constantly enthusing about how wonderful it is to be really up close and personal with birds, and birds are possibly my favourite thing in the world, I think. I absolutely love them, but actually bird ringing, it takes it from getting excited about birds and enthusing and wanting to do things, and it's actually a scientific data collection. So it's a bit different, and you know, it's a bonus being able to hold birds and be up close and see all these fantastic things, but the real meaning of it is the science and the data. So what is bird ringing? So like I said, it's a scientific method of data collection, and here I've got an example of one of our pages of books. So you've got ring numbers, species, and then lots of codes that will make no sense, and when I start up after a break make no sense to me as well. And all we do really, we put a lightweight ring on a bird, sometimes a coloured ring as well, but I'll get into that a little bit later, and they've got unique codes on them. We jot that down, and then we take biometrics, so weight, size, all that sort of thing. Species, obviously, it's quite an important one to know what we've rung. And all of that is written down on paper, and then the fantastic ringers go and move all of that online. So it's quite a lot of data entry, and as much, you know, like I said, as much as it's nice having these birds in your hand and being able to see things, there's a lot of background work that is basically just punching in letters and numbers into a computer repeatedly. But I think it's really also important to talk about why, and I've been gifted this lovely photo of some young swifts as well. And this is a photo from my ringing trainer, so he rings swifts, and he loves swifts, and he's got a million swift boxes on his house. It's fantastic. And the main reason for bird ringing really is to observe trends in population and survival, so looking at things like migration and all that. So we're going to talk a lot more about that sort of thing. The ringing scheme with BTO, which is where I ring, it's through volunteering through BTO, which is the British Trust for Ornithology. They've been going for about 100 years, so it's quite a long-standing scheme, and we've learned a lot about this. But the BTO also have other schemes that feed into that. So there's nest recording schemes, there's the breeding bird survey, the wetland bird surveys, there's all these other bird surveys that come in that obviously I find time to go and do those too, but then if you add in the actual data of where is this bird at this point, and this point, it all comes together. And that feeds into conservation projects. It can feed into, if we're seeing a massive decline on a certain species, we can almost pinpoint when and why through ringing in quite a lot of cases. How do we ring birds? With great difficulty. So I learnt the hard way in winter that blue tits love to bite. They are really feisty, and they've got a real knack, I'm sure you can see, of latching on right on the inside of your fingernail, and they'll hold and they sort of pulse slightly, so they let you know that they're really grumpy with what you're doing. And the hold that I'm doing here is called the ringer's grip. Now birds, they have this sort of separation, I suppose, between their head and shoulders, and you can just slot your fingers in. So there's no power, nothing. You're kind of just holding your hand loose, and they just sort of pop in quite nicely. It's amazing. At first you're sort of holding this bird thinking, oh, this feels really weird, but actually it's the best way to hold them. Their wings are in, they can't hurt themselves, we can't hurt them, but they can hurt us, so it's not great for us. And so they're caught in what's called mist nets. So it's these long nets that are kind of, I mean, some of them are as long as this room is, and they have little pockets. So the birds fall in and they drop into a pocket. And then they stay there pretty much, unless it's a cuckoo or a moorhen or some of the bigger birds which find their way out. In that case, you are running to that mist net. Once they're caught, they're removed and popped in a bag. And obviously in the bag it's dark, so they kind of calm down pretty quickly. We take them back and then we put these little rings on. Now this dunnock is the first bird I ever put a ring on all by myself, and I was very proud of myself. So it's got a special place in my heart, this little dunnock. And then once the ring's on, that's the key, is we put the ring on first before anything else, because sometimes the birds wriggle out of your hands, especially like me, if you're a trainee with small hands, they wriggle out quite a lot. And then from that point we check their weight, and we'll also check, if we can, whether they're male or female. And I'll get into that again a little bit later. We check their wing length, because length of the wing in some birds is kind of one of the only ways you can tell whether they're a male or female. And then we also look for if they've got any fat on their underside. So you blow up their feathers to see if you can see any fat, and you see if you can feel their sternum, which is how you tell how much muscle they've got. So yeah, there's lots of things you do, and you have to be kind of ambidextrous, and there's lots of stuff with your hands. So when it's, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning, freezing cold winter, it's a bit difficult, but you get used to it, and you get used to what you're feeling for. And one of the books I've got right on the end, it's got kind of pictures of the different levels of fat and the different levels of muscle that you're looking for. And again, I have to check pretty much with every bird on that sort of thing, but our trainers and people that have been ringing for a lot longer, it's kind of, you know, it's natural to them now. And then on the other side I've got this lovely photo, and I will talk about them a little bit later even more, but it's a long-tailed tit family. And what happened was, but the two mums, which are being held together, they went into the net and fell in, and then their little ones had obviously just fledged, didn't know what to do, saw their mums were in the net, and just sort of clung on. And they were very confused, and they were very sweet. So we were sort of picking off these little babies together. And then at the end, we took some photos together. We obviously took them all away together, and then took them all back to where they went, rather than letting them go, which is quite a walk away, where we actually ring and process the birds. We brought them back to where they fledged and let them go, because there were some juveniles that obviously hadn't gone in the net, and so everyone was together. And then the rest of that day we were listening to them bounding their way through the site, which was really lovely. But yeah, it was quite funny. We were going to get a really lovely video of them all flying off at the same time. The parents flew off and the fledglings stayed in our hands, so we had to put them up in a tree, but they were fine. And obviously there are a lot of precautions taken. So the thing to stress most, I think, with bird ringing is the data is really important, but nothing is more important than the welfare of the birds. So if we get a bird in the net that doesn't look too well for whatever reason, we're not going to take it back, process it, put it through that stress, we're just going to let it go. For example, like with this family, we're not going to let fledglings go 100 metres away from where they last were, or 100 metres away from potentially where their nest is. So that's always the priority. And it's actually really nice seeing the care and attention that is put into the birds when we're ringing, especially in winter when you've got little birds. Your top of your head is the warmest spot. So if birds are getting particularly cold, the small ones, you put them on your head with a beanie in the bag, and it just warms them up, and then you can let them go. And it's lovely seeing that happen, and seeing them fly off after sort of looking a bit cold is really special. But obviously we've also got to think about things like bird flu. So for a period of time, if there were any ducks or gulls that touched the net, we had to completely disinfect the net and shut it. We had to disinfect all the nets after. Some of the rules have then been lifted, and then others have been put in, so we're still sanitising our hands after every batch of birds. Loads of different rules coming in and out, so it's a lot to think about. Luckily I just get to do what I'm told. I don't have to actually do much thinking in that sense. But yeah, so there's a sort of long procedure, and this is only one way of ringing birds. There are lots of different types of nets, there's lots of different types of methods, waders, gulls, seabirds, all this sort of stuff that I haven't done yet, so I'm not going to talk about because I don't know anything about it. And then a couple of stories on birds that have been rung. So this is Lapwing BT32114, of course. That's not the actual lapwing, but this is what a lapwing looks like. And they breed on farmland and moorland usually, and then they'll go to the estuaries in winter. Most birds, they will be born in one area. They kind of go back to the same area to breed. However, we are seeing that some are travelling to other countries. So this one, for example, it was rung in Finland in a place called Toisa on the 9th of June 2005. And then on the 29th of January 2009, it was sadly found dead in Frampton-on-Severn. So it's gone almost 2,000 miles in that period, which is just fantastic. I mean, the size, they're little birds and it's gone 2,000 miles. So that's really interesting, and that's some of the sort of movement patterns that we've seen in lapwings. And then we've done lots of talking actually at GWT recently about cuckoos, and there is a cuckoo tracking project that the BTO are doing, and you can actually go on to their website and track specific cuckoos, which is fantastic. And cuckoos have declined by, I think it's something like 68% in England, which is massive. They've had a huge decline, and this map shows and it might not show very well for people online, but the blue dots are where they've declined, and the red is where they've gained in population. So up in Scotland, they've gained in population, and then further south and in England, they've declined. And there's lots of different theories, obviously, going all over the place, but the two main theories that stick out is that their migration routes are different. So something's happening on those migration routes, which means the ones going up to Scotland are getting there and they're fine. The ones going further north are not. But also there's been lots of talk about, especially in the south, the decline of macro moths, so our bigger moth species. We've got loads of micros, but the macro moths have had a really serious decline, and that's one of their main food items. So that's a potential. So one way you can help cuckoos is to increase moths in your garden, and moths are my second love, so it kind of works perfectly. And then also I had a look at the cuckoo tracking, and we've got Trent, who's pretty close to us. He's between Tewkesbury and Worcester, and that was his journey in the last year. And these sort of jumps, these massive jumps, are almost by week. And then he hangs around in one spot, and then by week he does this huge travelling. And if you go on, you can actually tick like by day or by week and see how he moves. But yeah, he's gone all the way where he was rung up in, or ringed, I keep saying rung and I'm pretty sure it is ringed, up in, I can't remember the name of the place actually, I did write it down. Ryall, don't know if any of you know Ryall, but it's between Tewkesbury and Worcester. And then he's come all the way down here, hung out, right down bottom, and then come all the way back up. So that's his migration route. And yeah, it's just interesting because where different birds are in the United Kingdom, you can see they're different migration routes, and some kind of go up one side and down the other, some go up and down the same like Trent's done. So I do advise going and having a look. But they've got 5G tags on them, and it's mostly adult males. There's one female that was tracked as well. So a few birdie highlights and a bit of a bird ID quiz, because that is the most important thing, is knowing what bird you're actually looking at. So you've got this bird, any ideas?
Redwing.
Yeah, redwing. So that was lovely, that was very exciting. This one. Now this bird is described in books as unmistakable, which is great if you know what a kingfisher looks like. It's really useful. If you don't, it's not as useful. And this one's a male because he's got an all black beak. And then I'm pretty sure as well that this one is a juvenile. Now the legs aren't this bright orange. I might be corrected in the Facebook comments. And also right at the end of the beak, what I was noticing with the juveniles is they're not as long. So the beaks aren't quite as long. So we actually do measure their beaks if we're not sure whether they're juveniles or adults yet. This one? Yeah. So this was a really special moment for me because I didn't know we'd caught it. and Peter specifically left that bag and made sure that I got it, and I put my hand in and heard a squeak, and I squeaked back because I was so excited because I knew it was a tree creeper. So that was really special to be able to ring one of these birds. They're so beautiful. And we went on a walk yesterday or the day before, and with Mike, who sat at the front here, and we saw a family of tree creepers flying around. So they're a very special place in my heart. I've got this. So this is a male sparrowhawk. And I got sent this photo by Peter because it had gone after some sparrows. and he managed to grab it and ring it, which is fantastic. I mean, the luck of that. But no, it's just a fantastic photo, and it shows that the ringer's grip can work from these tiny little birds like blue tits all the way up. Obviously for me, it's a bit harder for me with much smaller hands to hold birds like that. But yeah, it's a really nice way. You can see how the shoulders of the wings are up, and he looks very grumpy, but he was let go pretty quickly after that. This bird? Yeah, so this is a male siskin. We had quite a lot of siskins in the winter time, which was really nice because usually they fly really high up, so we weren't very optimistic that we'd get them, but actually we did get quite a few. He's very proud of himself. These ones? Yeah. So this is another really interesting one, again, courtesy of Peter. So this is I think it's a pair from the look of them. And they were in his garden, which is near Wootton under Edge. The nearest other than that has been Forest of Dean or Westonbirt. So what they were doing there, don't know, but it was lovely, and they've got rings on now. So if anyone finds them, please report your rings and we can see where they've gone from this point. This one? Yeah. Male or female? Male. Yes. Yeah. So it was lovely. This one came back 2 or 3 times, I think just to scratch us, if I'm being completely honest. So we got him, and I think it worked out that he was a juvenile as well. We got him in the nets, and we put a ring on him. Same day he went back into the net. So we would just check the rings usually if it's a similar bird, and we kind of remember the codes and let him go. And then a few weeks later we got him again. So he was out for us, I think, a little bit. But yeah, it's fantastic, the power of these birds, because they're not that big, and actually they are so strong. They're so powerful. And yeah, he was treating our hands like it was a tree trunk, but it was fine. We loved it. It was okay. And we got some fantastic information from him. And then this one. And don't worry, because I didn't know what it was either.
Some sort of warbler?
It's a type of warbler, yeah. But no, it's a garden warbler. And I think the description was that they're just very muted and a little bit boring. And that's how we know that they're garden warblers. And it was really nice. So we've been doing ringing. All these birds were, apart from obviously the sparrowhawk and the crossbills, they've been rung at Slimbridge, WWT, down the road. And we were chatting to one of the volunteers who was saying, we were listening to a lesser whitethroat teasing us next to one of the nets, never went in. And they were saying how they haven't seen any garden warblers yet. And there we go, got one right in. We hadn't even heard them singing, just went straight in the net. So yeah, it was really lovely. And it was the first time I'd sort of confirmed that I'd actually seen this bird as well, because they are so muted and they're very similar to things like chiffchaffs and, well, all the other warblers. They just look like kind of a bit of a duller, but I think a really pretty version of them. They look a bit airbrushed. They're very sweet. So now we get into the nitty gritty, which is molten aging. Now these two are the same bird. What birds do we think they are? Yeah, so these are juvenile long-tailed tits. The one on the left-hand side here has got a lovely long tail and a really nice thick black bandana, and was in the net flying around. This one is one of our fledglings. And we know it was such a recent fledgling because it's still got this sort of baby mouth and it's a bit muted. And also it's a short-tailed tit at the moment. It's not a long-tailed tit. And I thought I'd put those two photos together because you can really see the difference so they fledge and then their tails grow, because they can't have these great long tails in the nest because there's no room for them. So they do that, which I didn't know, which was a learning experience for me. And molten aging is the biggest part, I think, of bird ringing, is learning what feather looks slightly different to another feather, and that's how you age it. And to some birds you can age it to 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and sometimes up to I think 7 or 8 or 9 years, which is amazing. Gulls are really easy to age. This is another experience I had recently, and this was with the Gloucester Raptor Monitoring Group. So I was put in touch through BTO. And these are tawny owls, and they are so sweet. But I put them both together because we've got these 3 here, which are obviously really young. Now, they were just probably a couple of days that we could actually put rings on because their feet had just got big enough. So sometimes you'll check a box and their feet won't be big enough and you can't put the ring on because they can slide down and then clamp their foot shut, which is not good at all. So it's fascinating going out with these really experienced ringers who can just look at a bird and go, yeah, or look at it and go, no, I'd have no idea. So it's fascinating. But yeah, they were very sweet. And then here we had 2 that were much older, and you can see they're getting their flight feathers through. So they weren't far off fledging really, because owls, they branch first, so they don't fully fledge. They go out onto the trees and you'll hear them doing these really sweet little raspy squeaks for a bit. They're not discreet at all, and then eventually they'll go on and fledge. But yeah, the mums were in and around the nests, and she sort of flies out and stares at us until we go away, and then she's straight back in there. But yeah, especially with the little fluffies, we're very quick, and it's sort of in and out straight away just to make sure. But yeah, the mum was back within moments of us leaving. I was just talking about babies really. I mean, we're in spring and summer, so this is a goldcrest. And it was again a fledgling, and it hadn't long left the nest, this one. This was last year, and it doesn't have a crest at all. So when I saw it, I thought, well, it just looks like a weird goldcrest, and then obviously learnt that it was a juvenile. And so we also look at breeding condition. So for males, they have what we call a CP, so a cloacal protrudence. And for females, they'll have this, which is a brood patch. So you see it's all really wrinkly. This is a great tit. It's really wrinkly, so that's where the eggs touch. So they lose all of their feathers there and then brood. Now some males and females brood, so they'll both have brood patches. Sometimes you might even get the odd bird that's definitely a male that doesn't brood eggs and it has a brood patch and we don't know why. So there's all these sort of things, and it's really interesting. There's a lot of, well, this is how it should be. But this is sometimes what we find as well, which is fascinating. Birds are such an incredible species. And yeah, like I said, some birds you just can't tell. You can't tell until they're in breeding condition, and then sometimes even then it's difficult. So there's little, oh well, this bird might have a slightly more orange eye, or this bird might have a slightly longer wing, but you know, it's difficult to tell. So quite often we'll check books and then just mark it as we're not sure, which is fine. It's fine. It's rather better to say you don't know than to mark something down wrong, definitely. And then also with the younger birds, and this is one of the ways you can tell between adult and juvenile, is they have what's called castellations on their tail. And it's kind of like the shape of a castle, so their tails do that, and that signifies that their tails grew while they were in a nest. And I remembered that word not that long ago, because there's quite a lot of long words. There's another one that it took me quite a while to remember. But yeah, that's something to look out for. But it's so subtle that it does take years and years and years to be able to look at a tail and go, oh yeah, it's castellated, so it's definitely a juvenile. And you think, yeah, it is. Yeah, I know that. But yeah, I have got a load of books here, so do have a look. My birthday was basically bird ringing books this year, which I was very happy with. So yeah, at the end of the talk, by all means, we'll have a look through those. And now speaking about identifying birds, I learnt a new word, willow chiff, because the difference between willow warblers and chiff chaffs is so minute that it's almost impossible. And I think it wasn't that long ago that they were actually differentiated as a species, not that long ago, as in a few hundred years, I think. So one way is obviously by their song, which I'm hoping so that's a very long willow warbler. And then we should have the chiff chaff. I'm hoping everyone online can hear those as well. But there's a real obvious difference between their song. So if they're singing, it's fine. It's quite easy. You know it's a chiff chaff, and you know don't necessarily know it's a willow warbler, but you know it's not a chiff-chaff. There's lots of theories of ways you can tell the difference between the two, that one's a bit greener than the other, one's got darker legs, and chiff-chaffs have darker legs, and willow warblers have a longer primary projection, so their primary wing feathers go further down their tail. But that chiff-chaff's got quite long wings, and a quote that I'll never forget from Peter is, "How long is long and how dark is dark?" So there's a lot of difficulty. A lot of people will hear them and know, but this is the only way, other than their song, that you can actually tell the difference, and it's called imagination. So I loved this when I heard it, and I absolutely love going, well, actually, the only way you can tell the difference is chiff-chaff's 6th primary, which is their sort of longest feathers, is imarginated, so it's got an indent, whereas a willow warbler, their 6th, which is this one here, is not imarginated. So it's the 3rd to the 5th and the 3rd to the 6th. I've never had a willow warbler in my hand, and whenever we have one in the net, I always get, "What's that?" And I say chiff-chaff, and they go, "Is it?" And we have that exact same conversation every time. But yeah, that's the only real difference between the two, and the way to tell, obviously, unless they're singing. So it's a bit of a nice joke, really, that we all have, that willow warblers and chiff-chaffs come up to each other, especially females, because they don't necessarily sing, and they get out their wings and check each other's primaries to see if they're imarginated or not, you know. Is yours imarginated? No? All right, I'll go over there then. So, yes, it's very nice. But it's quite a fun thing to go around and go, well, actually. And I do like a well, actually moment. So, becoming a trainee. We've got a lovely picture here of Peter and then one of the interns, Charlie. So Charlie's learning how to ring there with the very special necklace, which has all the birds hung on it with all the different mist net numbers. And then at the top there, we've got a very realistic bird ringing, completely soaken and boiling hot. And the reason I've got a fleece on is because I was being completely covered by mosquitoes and midges. So it's not all glitz and glam, it's not all lovely birds. You get a lot of poo on you, you need a lot of caffeine, because we'll get up and start at sort of 4 in the morning almost, and we don't finish until midday. And by that point you've done 17,000 steps, your feet hurt because you've been in wellies wading through everything, you've got bites all over you, you've been bitten, and then you've been pooed on, and then something else has happened, you've tried not to fall asleep when you're sitting down, you've tried to remember the molt codes and you've got it wrong, you've let a bird go, another bird's got out of the net, and it all gets a bit much, and you sit there and you think, right, it's all about the data, it's all about the science, it's really important, we've got to keep going. So for me, it's absolutely worth it, because I know that I'm going to do this forever, and that one day I'm going to train people like me to do it. But what I will say is, if you're interested in becoming a trainee, it's long hours, it's exhausting, it's a lot of information, you have to invest time, you have to be really passionate, and it's not just about the birds, you have to be really passionate about the science and why you're doing it. So if you are, fantastic, that's great. But also for people that are just interested, I think, and I can pass on email addresses and things, I think there's going to be hopefully some demo sessions coming up where you can just go and see ringing happen and get closer. Because while we're ringing, it's not the easiest thing to show people what you're doing because you're so busy. And sometimes, like we've had once in summer, we were going around closing all the nets and there were 30 birds in a net. And you kind of think, and I remember standing there and I couldn't extract birds at this point. And I sort of said, and I said to Peter and Morris, another trainer, I said, at what point do we panic? We didn't need to, it was fine. But then at that stage, we do what's called ring and fling. So you put a ring on, you write down the species and the ring number and you let them go to stop, because you'd have a bird in a net potentially for half an hour, 45 minutes, which just isn't good for their welfare. So again, their welfare will always come first. And there could be people at a demo, for example, if you go, and there could be 30 birds, and realistically they'll have to go, hold on a second everyone, and you get to watch, and it's incredible the speed in which our trainers are ring on, bird down, they sometimes even get some data, gone, ring on, bird down, gone, ring on, it's just mind-blowing how fast they can do it. So yeah, one day I'll be able to do that, but for the moment it's sort of, can I do the ring, and the sort of bumbling about, which is quite fun. But yeah, so do let me know if you're interested in the demos, and I can try and pass some information over. But have a look on the BTO website, because that's got all the information about becoming a trainee. And obviously there's not that many trainers, so it's whether they have capacity. So there's a lot going on with that. So if you don't want to actually be a trainee and spend half of your life in wellies, getting eaten by mosquitoes and pooed on by birds, you can record and report instead, and that's your way of getting involved. So these are two lovely geese that I found at Frampton, and you can see they've both got, it's quite hard to see, they've both got silver rings on, but this one, I've called her a she, I don't really know why, I think she liked me, has a colouring with NC6. Now that means that that bird is part of a specific colouring project. So they've specifically rung with that so that photographs and people with binoculars can really easily read it. So I've gone online and reported that I found that bird, and that's then contributed to that data. But even birds that aren't being ringed and things like that, you can report on things like iRecord. If you see a really rare bird, you can drop an email over to us or to the Gloucestershire Centre for Environmental Records. Things like lots of pallid harriers have been seen recently, and I don't know how to tell the difference between a marsh harrier and a pallid harrier, so that's something I'm working out. And there's also hen harriers that also look really similar, but there's lots of birds around, so it's always worth reporting them. Because if you don't, there's kind of a gap in the data, and we've got a county recorder who goes through all the bird sightings. Like I emailed him on the 8th of April because I saw a hobby, which is the earliest we've seen a hobby for years, so they've come really early. But also spring started a little bit earlier, and we had all the house martins and sand martins and swallows back earlier, and there were damselflies and dragonflies out a bit earlier. So it's really interesting to see that pattern and trend. So that's another way you can get involved. And also making space for birds. If you don't want to record, you don't want to go out with your binoculars checking for rings all the time, that's fine too. You know, you could plant a hawthorn, plant a blackthorn, put some teasel in your garden, it's lovely. And then if you leave it to grow and leave it to go to seed, hopefully what you'll find is you'll have greenfinches and goldfinches come and balance on them. And one thing I didn't know until I heard recently is that there's been sightings of bullfinches balancing on dandelion clocks, which is very impressive because they're quite big birds and they can balance on those. And insects and water are another really good thing. So water tends to bring insects, but blue tits, for example, are absolutely covering my birch at the moment, picking insects from the undersides of leaves, which is great because it's pest control as well. So it all links in very nicely. So yeah, birds are very important is my point, and we should do everything we can to help them. And then I've been talking about tracking and about bird movement and all that sort of thing. So of course what I then have to do is talk about one of my sort of main remits at Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, which is known as the People's Nature Reserve. And basically what we're doing is we're connecting up all of our nature reserves, which are these little squiggly lines, our nature recovery zones, which are the purple, and people. So we're making connections between everything. Now birds need to be able to move through safely. If you've got a flock of long-tailed tits, for example, and they're in one stretch of woodland, they can see another stretch of woodland on the other side of your housing estate or something, but they're not going to make that journey because it's just too risky for them. Whereas if there's a tree here and a hedge here and something else that they can jump and stop off, you'll notice they sort of do this as they're moving. So that's what we're trying to create. And it's not just good for birds, as much as I love birds, it's good for all wildlife, but particularly for birds. They love that. And house sparrows are having a really hard time, and house sparrows need hedgerows and they need ivy going up houses for them to nest. So yeah, do take a look at that. There's lots of things you can do. But thank you for listening. I assume there'll be some questions about bird ringing, and I know there'll be some I can't answer. But yeah, do fire any questions at me if you'd like, and then as I said afterwards as well, we can have a look at some of the books. But thank you very much.